Ahoy there, folks! I'm Captain Benzie, and welcome back to the Catskull Academy, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know about the various different bits and pieces in EVE Online. In today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at how to improve your application. Now, I am expecting that you have at least a fundamental understanding of how turrets and missiles work, and we're going to be looking at Stasis Webifiers, target painters, guidance computers and tracking computers, and guidance enhancers and tracking enhancers. So basically, if you've ever asked yourself, should I be fitting a target painter or a Stasis Webifier or a computer, this video should give you the answer. Now, if you do enjoy this or find it useful, please take a brief second just to hit like, subscribe if you haven't already, and do consider dropping a super thanks on the video, as that does really help me buy a cup of coffee to help sort my voice out so I can keep making content like this. Anyway, all that said and done, let's jump right in to talking about the different ways you can improve your application with modules in EVE Online. So these are the 4 sets of modules we're going to be looking at. And I know you're thinking, hang on, Benzie, there's 6 modules there. Yes, because we've got a missile guidance computer and a tracking computer, missile guidance enhancer, and a tracking enhancer. They are fundamentally the same thing, just one's for missiles, one's for turrets. So we'll look at those together, but we'll talk about the differences between the tracking and the missile ones when we get there. Now, I will also put timestamps in the description down below so you can jump straight ahead to the different part you need, and then at the end we'll sort of tie it all together with a very basic and rudimentary rundown of which one you should choose when. So let's start things off then by having a look at a Stasis Webifier. All of the modules shown here are Tech 2. The attributes in that we're looking at are, of course, also going to involve the various different skills that I myself have. Now, a Stasis Webifier, when we look at this, the key points that we need to take away for the purposes of this video are that it has an optimal range of 10 kilometers and a maximum velocity bonus reduction of 60%. In shorthand, what this does is it reduces the speed of a target vessel within 10 kilometers by 60%. If they're going at 1,000 meters per second and you hit them with the Stasis Webifier, they'll go down to 400 meters per second. It is as simple as that. Now, when you are using missiles, your target's actual velocity matters due to the computation against explosion velocity. Basically, the explosion velocity compared to their actual moving velocity helps work out the damage application. The faster they're going or the slower your missile explosion velocity is, the less damage you actually apply, which is why fast exploding missiles are better against faster targets. With tracking, it's a little bit more complicated with turrets in that it's to do with the tracking speed of the turret and how that works against the target's angular velocity. Now, to explain angular velocity, I like to think of driving down a freeway or a motorway. Big multi-lane road, right? If you were having a Nerf war with your friends, for example, and they were in the car in front of you, if they're in front of you, it's going to be easy for you to reach out the window and shoot at them because they're not actually moving, right? Relative to you, they're not actually moving. They appear stationary because you're going the same way down the same road. They are just there in front of you. Same as if they're behind you and following you, and same as if they are going the same speed as you alongside you. If you're both going 100 kilometers an hour or 100 miles per hour, whatever you want in the US, and they're side by side, then again, you're going at the same speed. So relative to each other, you're not moving, which makes it very easy to hit each other. In those cases, you've got basically a 0 or at least a very low angular velocity. On the other hand, if they were driving towards you down a road, for the point that they are driving straight at you, they have very low angular velocity. But at the moment that they drive directly past the side of your vehicle, they've got an extraordinarily high angular velocity. So think of it that way. I don't want to get too bogged down in that at this point, but essentially by reducing the velocity of a ship, you can make it easier to hit. With turrets, this only really comes into effect when they are on a high angular velocity, so when they're trying to move sort of past you or sort of quickly across your field of vision, so to speak. With missiles, however, it's done on base actual velocity, the actual speed they're moving. So slowing them down just means your missiles hit harder. Now, the advantage of this is that in the case of both tracking and missile application, the actual velocity that the ship is moving at is a big part of that calculation. So reducing their velocity has a very large effect on the application with that. And these Webifiers That 60% reduction is a big boost to your ability to hit or apply damage to a target. The downside is they only have a 10-kilometer range. Let's move on then to the Target Painter. Target Painter is, again, fairly straightforward module with a couple of little kinks in the middle there just to keep things nice and confusing. Now, whereas a Stasis Webifier has an optimal range and that is it, we have more with the Target Painter. We've got the optimal range and then we've actually got sort of like a fall-off beyond that. Here you can see on a Target Painter 2, the optimal range is 36 kilometers, the effectiveness fall-off is 90 kilometers. So as you go beyond 36 towards 90, the effectiveness of the Target Painter reduces to 50% of its actual effect, and then as you go beyond that, it reduces even further. This means that when a Target Painter increases the target's signature radius, in this case, by 30%, it's doing that at the optimal range of 0 to 36 kilometers. Anywhere up to 36 kilometers, the target that you are aiming at will have a 30% increase to its signature radius. If they're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometers away, that will be gradually reducing from 30 towards 15%, and once you're beyond the effectiveness fall-off, that will reduce even further, eventually reaching 0%. This means that straight-up idea that, oh, it just makes them 30% bigger. No, only within that optimal range. Beyond the optimal, it's not the full 30% effectiveness that you're going to be getting. Now, whereas we talked earlier about actual velocity and relative angular velocity and things like that, with a Target Painter, you're not affecting the ship's velocity, you're affecting its size, its signature radius. And in any case, a larger signature radius is going to be easier to hit. With missiles, this plays into the explosion radius, in that a small signature radius and a large explosion radius makes for low application, whereas a large signature radius and a small explosion radius makes for better application. So making your target bigger means your missiles apply more damage to them every time they hit. With turrets, making your target bigger makes them easier to hit. It's again due to the size of the vessel and sort of how tracking works. If you kind of imagine, again, using that example of going down a freeway, if a car is rushing towards you and shoots past your window and then off into the distance, you are driving south to north and they're driving north to south, you're going to pass each other. On the approach, you've got very low angular velocity. On the way that they go past you, the moment they go past, they're incredibly high angular velocity. Now, if it's an 18-wheeler truck driving past your window, chances are you're still going to have the ability to reach out your window and fire something at it, throw an apple at it or whatever. But if it's a hummingbird that's flying past your window, it's much harder to hit. That's signature radius. Turn that hummingbird into a Ford Fiat or whatever, that's not a car. Turn it into a small car, and it's going to become easier to hit, right? And if you can turn a small car into a van, that's going to be easier to hit. And if you can turn a van into a bus, that's going to be easier to hit. And a bus turning into a lorry is going to be easier to hit. That is what a Target Painter does. Now, the advantage of a Target Painter, especially compared to a Webifier, is that it has a significantly longer range. Your standard Stasis Webifier range is around 10 kilometers. With a Target Painter, we're effective all the way out to 36 kilometers. The downside is that signature radius doesn't play into these equations quite as strongly as actual velocity or relative velocity does. Therefore, even though it's a longer range, it's not quite as effective as increasing your application. That said, if a target's orbiting at 30 kilometers to you and you can't put a Webifier on it, then a Target Painter is going to be flat out better. There's no two ways about it. If the Webifier doesn't work, then the Target Painter is going to be the better option. At least out of those two. But there's still modules we haven't talked about. That brings us nicely to the guidance computers. Now, these come in two different forms. You've got the missile guidance computer and you've got the tracking computer. No prizes for guessing what the major difference between those is. In short, it's the fact that the missile guidance computer affects missiles, whereas the tracking computer affects turrets. It's really that simple. If it's turret, use a tracking computer. If it's missiles, then use missile guidance computers. Ultimately, though, what they do is essentially the same. If we go down the line here on the missile guidance computer, you can see it increases the explosion velocity bonus, meaning your missiles have a faster explosion velocity. It also reduces the explosion radius, meaning they have tighter, more impactful explosions, and it also increases the flight time, which increases the range of those missiles. Now you'll notice that this time around, whereas the Webifier and the Target Painter are affecting the target ship, this is affecting only your vessel. And an immediate point we need to bring to that is therefore that if you are in a fleet engagement, a guidance computer or a tracking computer only affects your damage, whereas a Webifier or a Target Painter, because it's affecting the targeted ship, it will affect the damage of everyone who is shooting at that vessel, right? I hope that makes sense. However, it does directly impact our own missiles here. We're getting better velocity, explosion velocity, and better explosion radius, and slightly longer range. And that's just for having the module activated. You can also use missile guidance scripts in here. And I don't want to figure too heavily into this, just a basic rundown of these. Essentially, missile guidance scripts are kind of like ammo that you can load into the computer. They're not consumed and they are readily changeable on the fly. And there are two types of guidance script that we can use. There's optimal range and there's enhanced guidance. And the guidance enhanced script essentially reduces gives you better bonuses to your application again. But it comes at the expense of having that flight time bonus. Basically, you amplify the explosion velocity and explosion radius bonuses whilst negating the flight time bonus. And obviously, the optimal range bonus does the other thing. Essentially, it gives you better range, but gets rid of the fact that the guidance computer affects your explosion velocity and explosion radius. So you can play with the charges to do different things with a guidance computer. And this is the same if we then go into a tracking computer. You'll see here, though, rather than explosion velocity and explosion radius, of course, we have optimal range bonus, fall-off bonus, and tracking speed bonus. Those are the three that we get with a tracking computer. Obviously, optimal range and fall-off, again, you can use an optimal range script to increase the range of the turrets that you're using, but then they don't get the tracking speed bonus. Or you can do a tracking script in there, which will increase the tracking speed, but won't affect the range at all. So you can play around with that to get what you want. Again, I do remind you, the tracking computer and missile guidance enhancement computer only affect your vessel, and that's the up and down of this one. The positive is that you have that little bit of choice of what you're doing, and it's also the only one that's going to affect your range. The downside is it only affects your ship. Finally then, our fourth and final type of tracking or application enhancement we can look at are the enhancers. Now, unlike the previous three module groups we've looked at, enhancers are low slot modules. The other three, the Webifier, the Target Painter, and the computers, are all mid slots. The enhancers are low slots. And if we look at a missile guidance enhancer, you can see having this fitted gives us an explosion velocity bonus of 6%, an explosion radius bonus of -6%, and a flight time bonus of 6%. You'll notice that those bonuses aren't as big as the tracking computer or the guidance computer, but they're a low slot module, and you don't have to activate them. These don't have activation times and capacitor requirements. So if you've got spare low slots, these are a great way to just increase your ability to hit things. Again, they only affect your ship. They are not targeted against the enemy ship, which means only your vessel and the weapons that you are firing will benefit from this. This is the same again for the tracking enhancer. If we go into that one, you'll see we get an optimal range bonus, a fall-off bonus, and a tracking speed bonus. Again, not as big as we would get from a tracking computer, but it is a low-slot module. So if you're not worried about things like armor tanking, you've got a few low slots spare, this is a great way to give yourself a bit of extra range, a bit of extra tracking speed, and thus better application against your target. But again, it is only from the weapons you are firing. Now, having had a look at these four different module groups, the question is obviously going to be, yeah, okay, but which one do I use and when? And this is one of the really fun things about EVE Online, actually figuring this kind of stuff out for yourself. Yes, I'm going to give you my opinions, but there are going to be people who disagree with that, and it's also going to depend on the circumstance and the ship being flown. For example, if you're flying a golem, there's not really a point fitting a Webifier to it, because it gets direct bonuses to target painters specifically, so you may as well use target painters because they get the bonus from the ship, and that maths out better than the other advantages you might get. The way I tend to look at this is that if you are in a fleet engagement, then it is always going to be better to be using Webifiers than Painters, purely because they benefit everyone else in the fleet as well. That would be the entry level on this flowchart, so to speak. That because Stasis Webifiers and Target Painters affect the targeted ship, it means everyone targeting that ship has better application. Whereas the guidance enhancers and the tracking enhancers, the guidance computers and the tracking computers only affect your ship. But if you're soloing, it gets a bit more complex. Like if you're doing PvE solo, or if you're going solo hunting in PvP, yeah, it's a bit tougher. Now, obviously, the major point about a Stasis Webifier as well is that it does slow your target down, which means they are less likely to escape. Combine that with, things like a disruptor, a warp disruptor, or a warp scrambler, and you can actually hold a target in place really quite nicely. They are not going to be able to run away from you. So that is another benefit of the Webifier that the others do not have. So that should be taken into consideration depending on what you're attempting to do. Is your target going to try and outrange you? If so, then a Stasis Webifier is going to be a good option. But that comes with the addendum that the Stasis Webifier has short initial range. You need to be within 10 kilometers, or heck, if you're using something like a Federation Navy Stasis Webifier, even then it's only 14 kilometers. Unless your ship has bonuses, of course, to Webifiers. But for the most part, Stasis Webifiers are very short range. You need to be close to even use them. That means if you're going to be brawling, then yeah, sure, Webifier, great option. Nice and close, it's going to be effective. But if you're not going to be looking to try and hold that 10-kilometer range, if you're not going to be 10 kilometers or closer, then Stasis Webifier is a wasted module slot because it's literally doing nothing. As such, a target painter in that consideration immediately becomes a better option, right? Because it's going to be able to affect targets that are beyond the Stasis Webifier range. But at this point, I'll be honest, with a target painter, I tend to start to look towards the computers at this point. If it's mid-slots that I want to be filling up with some more application, then it's the computers I tend to look at when you are solo more than target painters. I find they give better application overall, plus the range bonus is really nice, and the ability to load in scripts to modify that even further is a really nice touch. So at this point, we've established if the Webifier's speed reduction is going to be useful to hold an enemy ship in place, or if you are going to be in range with the Webifier at least, then that's probably going to be your best option. If you're not going to be in range of Webifiers, then the computers probably going to be your next best option. And once you've got a computer fitted, maybe two of them, especially if you're going to be running counter scripts where you've got, like, say, one script of one type and one script of the other. Once you've got two guidance computers or two tracking computers fitted, and you're looking for a third bit of application, that's when I'd go for a target painter. This swaps when you're in a fleet, Webifiers if you're going to be in range to use them, target painters if you're not, guidance enhancers if you've got two of each of the other modules to start with. By the time you've got two of a module in your mid slots, the penalties for having multiple of those together start outweighing the benefits. Basically, what I'm saying here is if you've got three mid slots that you want to use for application, and you are solo ratting in a C3 anomaly, for example, you're going to be in web range. Go for two Webifiers to start with, then go for the guidance computer. If you're going to be kiting something and you're using target painters, go for two target painters, then the guidance computer. If you're going to be solo and kiting, go for two computers and then the target painter. That kind of thing. Look at that breakdown of chart. Stasis Webifier if you're going to be in range, or if the reduction to speed is also going to help hold your target in place if it's likely to run away. Then either if you're solo, go for your computers, and if you're not solo, go for your painters. But what about the enhancers, right? Well, those are the wild cards. Those are the ones that go in your low slots, so they're not competing with the same slots as the other. It's very easy to fit a Stasis Webifier and a guidance enhancer. They're different slot levels, right? They are different slot layouts. A guidance enhancer or a tracking enhancer, I look as basically being that little bit of extra that you can put into low slots if you're still struggling with application once you've filled your mid slots. If you can get your mid slots to work, then awesome. You can do what you want with the low slots. But if, for example, you've got mid slots and you've put in like a couple of webs and a guidance enhancer and you're still struggling to hit some of the smaller targets, guidance computer, sorry, and you're still struggling to apply to some of the smaller targets, then yeah, maybe put some guidance enhancers in the low slots. Or if, for example, you just really, you've got 2 Webifiers, but you'd like that little bit of extra tracking, then put a tracking enhancer in the low slot, because your other mid slots are taken up by things like shield tank or cap batteries, that kind of thing. They're basically, as the name implies, enhancers. Use Webifiers, painters, and computers to get the application as close as you can to where you want it. Match it if you can, but if you can't quite get there, that's when you look at enhancers in the low slots. Anyway, folks, hopefully this demystifies these applications and these modules. Hopefully you can now decide which one of these you actually want to fit to your ships. And if you have found this useful, please subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this. Consider becoming a channel member. Helping support the channel is always something that helps me make more content. You can join me on Patreon. You can join me with a tip on my PayPal tip jar, or channel memberships are the newest and greatest way to really support the channel. They help me out directly and they give you some really cool, unique channel perks too. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching this one right the way through to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.